So quite fittingly, our fourth and final speaker for the Species ID Virtual Symposium is talking about how we assess ID skills. So I'm handing over to Chantal from the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland to tell us all about the FISC, the Field ID Skills Certificate. So over to you, Chantal. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kieran, and good afternoon to everybody who's here. Great to see so many people. So as Kieran said, I'm talking about FISC in my role as BSBI training coordinator. I've been in that role now for a year and a half. It was a newly created role when BSBI actually took on FISC officially as coordinator and owner. And I also support the Identity Plant course as well, which Kieran has mentioned I'll be talking about in October too. I've got my toes in a few other sectors. I'm also an academic. I used to be full-time senior lecturer in ecology. Now I am very much part-time because my role at BSBI is part-time. I do visiting lecturing there. I also am in the professional ecology sector. I'm a freelance ecologist, bat recorder, bat surveyor. And I am the mammal recorder or co-mammal recorder for mammals in Hertfordshire. So I do a lot of voluntary work as well with bat groups and various other natural history organisations. But obviously today we're talking about botanical skills and assessing them through the FISC. So before I start on the FISC itself, I just thought I'd quickly mention something about botanical literacy out there amongst the general population and what studies have been done on it in the past. Some of the studies have shown quite dire sort of levels of skill across the general population and within school children, as well as at university level. So I think a study in 2010 by Bevington showed that 86% of A-level biology students could only recognize 3 or fewer native plants. And once you get into university degrees, unfortunately, we've lost all of our botany degrees. Most of them are now called plant science if a university offers anything around plants. And a study by Seb Stroud, who is about to join the BSBI Skills and Training Committee as chair, back in 2022, did a bit of a look at what was going on at Russell Group universities and found that only 1% of modules offered within a biology degree actually had any significant emphasis on plant ID. So this obviously results in a little bit of concern in terms of the graduates coming out of university degrees and what their skill levels are with regards to plant ID. And Seb also wrote this interesting paper about botanical education extinction, which I highly recommend you have a read of if you have a chance. So coming to plant ID and professional practice then, I think there was a paper a few years ago in the SIEM In Practice magazine, which was lamenting the issue of how important plant ID skills were to professional ecologists. And I put the slightly controversial heading there about how more important it is to have a bat license than it is to be a competent field botanist. I think the article was really highlighting the fact that there are huge numbers of different guidance documents, pathways to learning and developing skills for various protected species, but comparatively little for plant ID and plant surveys and habitat surveys. I think there's no SIEM competencies for species survey for plants or habitats as yet. So if you go onto the website and have a look, you can get a species competency for bats and otters and everything else, relatively speaking within a development context, but plants and habitats relatively little. And I just did a little bit of a fun exercise looking at the good practice guide, counting up how many documents were referenced associated with bats compared to plants. So that's just a bit of a fun exercise to showcase that. So BSBI, as a charity, we are relatively small in terms of staff. I think we only have about 15 staff members, but we do punch quite above our weight in terms of all the work that we do. And one of the key parts of our work is trying to improve plant study skills. Obviously, generally, we have a number of training courses. We signpost to a lot of training courses. And we do have our in-house Identity Plant online course, which has already been mentioned, which we'll be talking about later. And recently we have updated and improved our botanical skills ladder. So you may or may not be aware that we've had a botanical skills pyramid for quite a number of years. This is hot off the press, this updated version, which really sort of collates all of the previous documents that have been mixed about on our website to showcase the 7 botanical levels, skill levels. And it also then highlights some of the professional and voluntary opportunities associated with each level, which BSBI recommends would sort of fit at particular levels. So, for example, becoming an identity plant tutor is recommended to be at level 4, and undertaking UK HAB phase 1 or foster habitat surveys if you're in Ireland would be level 3, and so on. And then up at level 5 that's where you start getting people who are going to be FISC assessors or gold standard surveyors. And if you don't know what those are, I'm going to explain in a minute. So there are 7 levels in the botanical skills ladder, and I think there should be a link hopefully going in the chat for this new ladder, because as I said, it's hot on the press. You probably won't be able to Google it yet. We will be uploading it to the BSBI website soon and announcing its publication. But the 7th level on that skill ladder is slightly outside of the field skill plant ID area, which we're going to be talking about. So for FISC, we're only really talking about level 1 to 6. And FISC is the assessment tool which has been developed, which can assess whether somebody is at a particular level. The botanical skills ladder is slightly different in that it is a tool for people to use to potentially self-assess their skill level. And BSBI is, for all of its members, asking its members to self-assess themselves against this ladder now, so that we can really get a bigger understanding of where everybody is and where they think they are. And then this can obviously be compared against what people obtain in a FISC if they were to take one later, at a later date. So FISC was founded in 2007 by Sarah Wild and Sue Dancey. They're the original founders. And they handed over the FISC program and the deed and everything to BSBI fully at the end of 2022. BSBI was obviously very involved in it since the beginning. However, it was delivered through a number of independent partners, and various different approaches were taken. But in 2022, the whole FISC program has been brought in-house to BSBI, and now we manage it and have developed very robust and transparent protocols for how FISCs should be run across the country, across the nation. Even we're hoping to expand into Scotland and potentially Ireland in the future. Currently, it's very much England-based. So, what is a FISC? Well, it's a standard assessment for skills for vascular plant ID. It doesn't hope to test your skills in bryophytes as yet, but all those higher plants. It's a rigorous test and really tests the complete range of botanical abilities under real-life scenarios. So it is an exam, and obviously it's a day exam. It can cause some nerves in certain individuals, and some people perform better under those circumstances. There is something to be said: the more FISCs you do, the more comfortable you come with the process. So that's an idea. But it tests your inherent botanical skills. So you can't really SWOT for a FISC in the same way as you may be able to for other exams. It's testing those inherent and permanent skills. And your skill set can actually change over time. Obviously, it can improve if you're investing a large amount of effort in the field and learning new plants and so forth. But if you don't go out into the field for a year or two, I'm sure you appreciate that skills, as with anything else, will probably decline in your ability to identify plants and remember different species. So a question that has come up is, how long does a FISC last for? And there hasn't ever been a expiry on a FISC certificate up to now, but we are considering implementing one from next year, and looking at a period of 5 years where someone who has a FISC would essentially be required to undertake a new one to update their assessed level. So the other important part of FISCs is that it avoids regionalization. We get a lot of questions about, oh, well, if I'm from Scotland and I do a FISC in England, am I not going to be disadvantaged? The FISC uses test specimens from national range across the whole UK, and it really aims to pull that together so that is as representative of a regional sort of variety of places as possible, and there's no bias. And the other important point is it's run by an excellent botanist who is at FISC level 5 or equivalent, and it is subject to a rigorous quality assurance process as well. So all tests are quality assured at the end of the year to ratify and moderate any marks that have been given out to candidates attending FISCs, so that there is a standardized process and everybody is very sort of open and clear about how they have achieved their score. The important point, we've just written a paper which hopefully will be coming out in the SIEMS in Practice magazine for September about what FISC is and is not, because I think there's some misconceptions out there about what it is for, particularly coming out from certain employers and contractors who are specifying certain levels of FISC for specific job roles, which is causing us a bit of concern. So that paper is really highlighting some of those things. But it's also not intended to be offered as a culmination of a talk course. So that's important. And it is not a test of the non-field-based skills listed on the Botanical ladder. So therefore, there is no FISC level 7 and never will be, because level 7 on the Botanical skills ladder is someone who is publishing monographs and all sorts of things, and that's not testing their field-based skills, which is what a FISC intends to do. The big important thing, what FISC is not, it doesn't test knowledge or competency of using a particular vegetation survey method. So whether you're involved in UK HAB or the slightly outdated phase 1 as we're moving away from that now, or MVC or any of those other survey methodologies, it doesn't test your competency within that. And it doesn't test your ability to categorize or evaluate the condition of habitats. Okay, so that's key important points of what it isn't. My slide to move on would be good. So, apologies. So the FISC assessment itself consists of 4 scores, which come out of 3 tests on the day. It's a one-day event. There is a lab test 1, which consists of 10 specimens, which are generally quite common and widespread, and candidates are asked to identify them without the use of any resources. So either you know it or you don't, kind of thing. Lab test 2 is 20 specimens. Now these have been collected from around the country, all the way to Scotland, even from Ireland and so forth. And they will be representing plants from a whole set of different habitats. There's the protocols are quite stringent in terms of how these plants need to be selected and how many grasses and how many rushes and sedges and ferns and how many rare species and how many aquatic species and how many vegetative species you need to have within that test. So it's quite a task to actually collect and gather those specimens for that test. But candidates are allowed to then use any resources that they choose. They can bring along anything. Some candidates bring whole trolley loads of different handbooks and field guides and so forth to help support them in that endeavor. And then there's the field test, which is obviously going out into the field in the afternoon and within a defined area, recording as many of the plants as you can within a set time. At the same time, there is someone called a gold standard surveyor who is then also recording in the same area under the same time constraints, and then the candidate score will be compared against the gold standard surveyor's score, so that you can get a field test score at the end. The 4th score that I mentioned comes out of what we call false positives. So this is where a candidate records something that doesn't occur on the site. And these are quite interesting because sometimes someone may feel it could be worthwhile trying to write down everything they possibly can think of that may be common on the site. But if it isn't on the site, and the Gold Standard Surveyor doesn't record it, and there's no records of it on that site in the past, then that will result in a negative mark for that species. So it encourages accurate and careful recording, and especially trying to make sure that someone doesn't record something to a taxonomic level that could be problematic. So, for example, carrick species or sedge species, if you don't know the species level, providing the genus name will give you half a mark, whereas if you actually provide the species name and that species is not found on the site, you will then get a -1 mark. So that's how that works. So the FISC roles involve a number of players. So BSBI, as we said, is the coordinator and owner. We establish the protocols, we update those every year, we maintain consistent standards and quality assurance. We approve and train all the FISC providers and assessors, so all the other people who deliver the FISCs. We build capacity, we run the FISC appeal process. And BSBI is assisted in this by a FISC development working group, which is what the FDWG stands for. And we also then have a QA panel, which undertakes the QA at the end of the year. So the FISC provider is the organization that then takes on the responsibility for delivering the FISCs. And we've been really happy to have the Field Studies Council joining us again as a provider. So we will be expanding through them from next year, hopefully. We also then have FISC Assessors. And I mentioned FISC Assessors earlier with the Botanical Skills Ladder, in that FISC Assessors need to be at level 5. And I'll quickly remind everyone what that means in a minute. But they are the expert botanist who really runs the FISC assessment. So they are required, their responsibility is to collect the plant specimens for the lab tests, making sure that they're following all the key protocols, and they will be marking the FISC, which is no mean feat. Marking a FISC takes a lot of time and effort and a lot of skill to be able to sort through all the specimens that have been recorded. Then there's the Gold Standard Surveyor, we mentioned, who is the expert botanist, also at FISC level 5 or above, who undertakes the field survey alongside the candidates and against which they are all benchmarked. And then there's the FISC candidate, of course. So there's the definition of a FISC level 5 botanist. So someone who's able to identify most widespread UK vascular plant species, including species of grasses, rushes, and sedges, most rare species, as well as common subspecies and hybrids. So this is across the whole of the UK. So they need to have quite national knowledge. And broad experience of species and habitats nationally. So this table is just a quick history of how FISC has come along since 2007 when it started. There's a little bit of unknowns there, some gathering the data together. But in total, about 1,600 people have taken a FISC to date. And you can see in 2023 was the first year that BSBI was coordinating FISC. And we have tried to expand the number of providers delivering FISCs, and work is still ongoing in that respect. So we were able to deliver 26 FISCs last year, and a similar number are being delivered this year in 2024. So I suppose the question comes in terms of assessing plant ID skills. What is the value of a FISC? Its value as a something to have on your CV has increased substantially in recent years. So it's increasingly being included in the recruitment criteria for jobs in ecology and field botany, which is a good thing. It's being recognized as an assessment tool, and candidates who have a FISC are able to demonstrate that through that process. SIAM is also recognizing it as part of their competency standards for preliminary habitat surveys. A number of consultancies and Natural England have adopted it as a metric for determining the botanical fieldability and rewarding progress for their staff. But I think more generally, it allows candidates to actually really understand their current skill level. It's one thing self-assessing your skill level, but having an independent, standardized, and verified test of your skill level really can give you confidence in where you stand, and then also give you guidance in terms of where you can go, what further training you should undertake to develop your skills further. It also potentially allows us to better understand the current skill level of active field botanists and ecologists out there, and therefore also allow targeted training and funding for training at different levels. So where do we need to focus training efforts to build up the botanical skill base? So while we're undertaking FISCs, there is also quite a lot of data that is being gathered at the same time. And we can answer some questions or ask specific questions about plant ID skills. So some ideas here is, well, how good are individuals at assessing their own plant ID skills? And we're busy writing up some work on looking at where a candidate came in to do a FISC. They self-assessed themselves, gave themselves a level, and then they undertook the FISC, and we were able to then compare that to see what that says. The other really interesting question that FISCs can sort of help answer or provide some information on is how reliable botanical surveys are undertaken by individuals at different skill levels. So that then obviously helps provide guidance on who should undertake which survey. Are we recording things that are not there? And I think this is where the false positive part of the FISC score becomes really interesting in understanding how often people are recording stuff that isn't actually on a site, and what implications that may have for various other knock-on aspects, development, conservation, and so forth. So this whole idea of type 1 and type 2 errors, or false positives or false negatives and so forth. So type 1 errors are really the bigger problem, in that if someone actually records something that isn't there, and that record then gets used for whatever purposes, then there are obviously problematic issues. Type 2 errors are also obvious, and I think probably much more common than type 1 usually, because that's where you will be you're failing to record something that actually is on site. And that also has its own implications. And again, I think a bit of a study, there's a link on the FISC website, and I think that'll also be put in the chat at some point, about this study link about false positives and what impacts that could have on botanical surveying. So that's some interesting insights that we can get from actually looking at the FISC data. One problem we're having now, FISC has become quite well known throughout the sector for both professional ecologists and amateur botanists, and demand is unfortunately outstripping supply at the moment. But BSBI is working really, really hard to increase the number of FISCs that are run each year. Most of the demand seems to be coming from ecological consultants, and potentially driven by the Introduction to the Environment Act, and BNG and UK HAB, which all require a significant increase in upstep in botanical ID skills. If you do a Google search for various ecological jobs, employers and contracting organizations are specifying the need for candidates to have a FISC at a particular level. Some of this is potentially misguided. I think there is concerns about requiring a FISC level 3 for people to undertake a BNG assessment, and that is coming up in a number of government advice notes. So, and the fact that we are unable to run that many FISCs to meet that kind of demand is going to create a bottleneck if it's not addressed. So we are a bit concerned about that. And then this is just an example of Forestry Commission guidance highlighting the need for FISC 4s to undertake these sort of assessments. So this is happening quite a lot. So we have capacity limitations, and not least of all because of the number of botanists out there who are at FISC level 5. So we are working to expand geographic coverage. This over here is a map of last year's FISCs in 2023, the FISC providers. It looks slightly different this year once we update everything. And we need to recruit more FISC assessors. We are really trying to do that, and we'll be undertaking another recruitment drive again towards the end of this year for next year. And this is just an idea of the 392 candidates that took a FISC last year, only 14 of them achieved a FISC level 5 or 6. So you can see the number of people who are at that level is very limited. So real targeted work needs to be doing to move people up the skill level in order to be able to increase capacity to deliver FISCs in order to be able to assess people. So we're kind of a bit of a chicken and egg at the moment. So then there's the amateur botanical community as well, which we do not want to be forgetting now that FISC has become quite an important professional qualification. Many amateurs are extremely competent botanists who are at FISC level 5 but may not have ever taken a FISC and may not be interested in taking one. But we are really keen to encourage botanists at that level to become FISC assessors and help us deliver FISCs so that we can increase the number of opportunities available and also therefore help people develop their skills and improve their skills along the ladder. Running a FISC is quite costly. So people who have been looking at FISCs may notice that the price has gone up in recent years. This is really linked to comments about paying people appropriately for their expertise. A FISC requires at least a whole day of time for at least 2 professional ecologists at an extremely competent botanical skill level. So if you can imagine the hourly rate for those individuals, not to think about the amount of time it requires to source all the specimens and plants for the lab tests and plan the FISC, and then all the marking. So there's a lot of time required to deliver a FISC, and hence they can be quite costly. So then that is going to be reflected in the price that is being charged for them now. This then is also potentially amplified by the increase in demand for FISCs. So some providers will obviously look at demand and supply and feel that they're able to increase their costs as a result. So we need to carefully think about not not stopping amateur botanists who aren't professionals from taking FISCs. So BSBI will need to, in the next few years, think about ways to deliver FISCs that are potentially funded in different ways at reduced costs for volunteers and others who are not professionals. There may be other alternative models that can be run that maybe don't rely on the need for a FISC level 5 botanist. Perhaps we could deal with a FISC level 4 botanist, which could run a mock FISC, for example, to give people the opportunity to experience a FISC at a much cheaper rate, maybe for their own self-interest, maybe just to sort of help them develop their own skills. And that would be something that we are keen to explore. And then there's been actually quite an interesting few number of requests from universities where they are potentially thinking about whether a FISC or some sort of FISC, a mock FISC or a mini FISC could be offered at the end of university degree that is focused on plant ID in some way or the other, which is an interesting concept which we are looking at exploring. The Botanical University Challenge, for those who know about it, sort of a bit of a contest with different universities across the country on a bit of a quiz game where they're asked various questions and teams go through, and we will be delivering a sort of a mock mini FISC at the end of the year event for the Botanical University Challenge, the BUC. So we will trial some ideas there as well. So just to finish off, BSBI is extremely grateful, obviously, to the founders of FISC, Sue, Dancey, and Sarah Wild, but obviously then also to the people who are on the FISC Development Working Group who volunteer their time to help coordinate and develop and QA our FISCs. So there are Sarah Wild, Sue Dancey, Mark Duffel, Alison Dukes, Rob Lodge, Val Gately, and Toby Hart in 2024. So we are extremely grateful to them. Many thanks for all of their support and help in delivering FISCs. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening. And I suppose we can open up for questions.